Committee will come to order. No one needs reminding of the escalating tensions in the Asia-Pacific region. Recent weeks have witnessed intentionally provocative words and actions from the North Korean regime. We're all concerned that the decades of self-imposed isolation of North Korean leaders, and especially the cruel, erratic behavior of its current leader, make confrontation potentially more likely. In my view, we must work even more closely with our key allies, Japan and the Republic of Korea. We must continue to encourage China to help put North Korea on a different path, and we must increase our military presence and capability in the region. Enhanced missile defense is especially important. Of course, none of us wants another military conflict on the Korean Peninsula, but we must also remember the lessons of the past. As T.R. Fehrenbach wrote on the first page of his classic history on the Korean War, This Kind of War, quote, "Storm signals have been flying for more than 4 years, but the West did not prepare for trouble. It did not make ready because its peoples in their heart of hearts did not want to be prepared," end quote. Well, whether we want it or not, we have to be prepared. Of course, North Korea is not the only concern in the PACOM area. China continues to build islands in the South China Sea and to militarize them. The future direction of the Philippines is unclear, and we're moving toward a closer relationship with new and developing allies like Vietnam. All of this and more are on the plate of our PACOM commander, Admiral Harry Harris, whom we are pleased to welcome today. Before turning to him, I'll yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Smith, for any comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Harris, for being here and for your leadership in the Pacific. And I agree with the Chairman's comments about the importance of the region. U.S. presence in that region has never been more important. Our presence, working with our allies, can be a calming influence in what is a very unstable place, as the Chairman described. And most disturbing and most concerning, obviously, is North Korea. I would say I don't think we're ignoring it this time. This is not like the first Korean War. I think there's been a great deal of attention paid to this problem in North Korea for several administrations, and I think that's helpful, because the number one biggest thing that we need is a clear deterrent to North Korea. We are not going to make Kim Jong-un a rational leader. We are not going to make North Korea anything other than a pariah state anytime soon, nor are we going to stop them from having some military capability. We are aware that they've already developed a nuclear bomb. But the one thing we can do is make it clear that we stand with our allies in the region, with South Korea and Japan in particular, and we will be a credible deterrent to any military action in North Korea. I think that's the most important thing to do, is to make it clear to Kim Jong-un that if he does anything, we have the power and the will to respond and destroy him. Because the only positive thing I can think about North Korea is that there's no evidence that their regime is suicidal. They don't want to be taken out. So we have to make sure we maintain a credible deterrent. And China fits into this as well. China wants increased influence in Asia, and on a certain level, that's understandable. They are a growing power. They want to have influence. What we need to do is to work with them to make sure that that influence is for positive instead of for ill, and North Korea is a very, very good place to start. They could be a lot more helpful than they've been being on calming those tensions, and it's in their best interests. They don't want war to break out in North Korea any more than anybody else does. It would have a far more devastating impact on their interests. So there are a lot of challenges. I'll just close by saying I think there are also a lot of opportunities. The Chairman alluded to some of those. We have a lot of allies in the region, and a lot of those relationships are growing. I would also mention, well, I'm not sure, India and South Asia is certainly an ally, and one that could become even more so. Australia, there are a lot of countries in that part of the world that want to work with us and that give us an opportunity to work together to make that place and the world a more peaceful place. And with that, I look forward to the Admiral's testimony. I thank him for his leadership and for his attendance today.
Admiral, again, thank you for being with us. You're recognized for any comments you'd like to make.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, Representative Smith, and distinguished members. It's an honor for me to appear again before this committee. There are many things to talk about since my last testimony 14 months ago. I do regret that I'm not here with my testimony battle buddy, U.S. Forces Command Commander General Vince Brooks, but I think you'll all agree that he's where he's needed most right now on the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately for all of you, that means my opening statement is going to be just a tad longer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your reference to T.R. Fehrenbach's book, This Kind of War, which is on the PACOM reading list. Mr. Chairman, I request that my written posture statement be submitted for the record.
Admiral, without objection, it'll be part of the record. I have to say, not to you, but to other folks, we got it about 9 o'clock last night, which means nobody's read it, as well as General Brooks' statement. So again, not directed to you, but to all of the layers that such written statements have to go through. They need to be more timely for this committee if they're going to be relevant to our hearing. If it's just putting words down on paper, then fine. But we need to do better in the future. And I needed to say that, again, not directed to you, but at those who seem to not have a sense of promptness. So without objection, so ordered. Please continue.
Thanks, sir. As a PACOM commander, I have the extraordinary privilege of leading approximately 375,000 soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, airmen, and DoD civilians serving our nation around half the globe. These dedicated patriots are really doing an amazing job, and thanks to them, America remains a security partner of choice in the region. That's important because I believe that America's future security and economic prosperity are indelibly linked to the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, and it's a region that's poised at a strategic nexus where opportunity meets the four challenges of North Korea, China, Russia, and ISIS. It's clear to me that ISIS is a threat that must be destroyed now. The main focus of our coalition's effort is rightfully in the Middle East and North Africa, but as we eliminate ISIS in these areas, some of the surviving fighters will likely repatriate to their home countries in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. And what's worse, they'll be radicalized and weaponized. So we must eradicate ISIS before it grows in the PACOM area of responsibility. Then there's North Korea, which remains the most immediate threat to the security of the United States and our allies in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. This week, North Korea threatened Australia with a nuclear strike, a powerful reminder to the entire international community that North Korea's missiles point in every direction. The only nation to have tested nuclear devices in this century, North Korea has vigorously pursued an aggressive weapons test schedule with more than 60 ballistic missile events in recent years. With every test, Kim Jong-un moves closer to his stated goal of a preemptive nuclear strike capability against American cities, and he's not afraid to fail in public. Defending our homeland is my top priority. So I must assume that the Kim Jong-un's nuclear claims are true. I know his aspirations certainly are. And that should provide all of us a sense of urgency to ensure PACOM and U.S. Forces Korea are prepared to fight tonight with the best technology on the planet. That's why General Brooks and I are doing everything possible to defend the American homeland and our allies in the Republic of Korea and Japan. That's why the ROK-U.S. Alliance decided last July to deploy THAAD, that's a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, which will be operational in the coming days and able to better defend South Korea against the growing North Korea threat. That's why the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group is back on patrol in Northeast Asia. That's why we must continue to debut America's newest and best military platforms in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. That's why we continue to emphasize trilateral cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, a partnership with a purpose if there ever was one. And that's why we continue to call on China to exert its considerable economic influence to stop Pyongyang's unprecedented weapons testing. While recent actions by Beijing are encouraging and welcome, the fact remains that China is as responsible for where North Korea is today as North Korea itself. In confronting the reckless North Korean regime, it's critical that we're guided by a strong sense of resolve, both privately and publicly, both diplomatically and militarily. As President Trump and Secretary Mattis have made clear, all options are on the table. We want to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses, not to his knees. We're also challenged in the Indo-Asia-Pacific by an aggressive China and a revanchist Russia, neither of whom seem to respect the international agreements they've signed on to. For instance, the arbitral tribunal in The Hague ruled last year that China's so-called nine-dash-line claim is illegal under the Law of the Sea Convention. Despite being a signatory to the convention, China ignored this legally binding peaceful arbitration. In fact, China continues a methodical strategy to control the South China Sea. I testified last year that China was militarizing this critical international waterway and the airspace above it by building air and naval bases on 7 Chinese man-made islands in the disputed Spratlys. Despite subsequent Chinese assurances that they would not militarize these bases, today they now have facilities that support long-range weapons emplacements, fighter aircraft hangars, radar towers, and barracks for troops. China's militarization of the South China Sea is real. I'm also not taking my eyes off Russia, which just last week flew bomber missions near Alaska on successive days for the first time since 2014. Russia continues to modernize its military and exercise its considerable conventional and nuclear forces in the Pacific. So, despite the region's 4 significant challenges, since my last report to you, we've strengthened America's network of alliances and partnerships. Working with like-minded partners on shared security threats like North Korea and ISIS is a key component to our regional strategy. Of 5 bilateral defense treaty alliances, our 5 bilateral defense treaty alliances anchor our joint force efforts in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. So I continue to rely on Australia for its advanced military capabilities across all domains and its leadership in global operations. As Vice President Pence and Secretary Mattis reaffirmed during recent trips to Northeast Asia, our alliance with South Korea remains steadfast, and our alliance with Japan has never been stronger. Even with some turbulence this past year with the Philippines, I'm pleased that we're proceeding with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, and we're looking forward to conducting the Balikatan exercise with our Filipino allies next month. And this past February, I visited Thailand to reaffirm our enduring alliance and to communicate that we look forward to Thailand's reemergence as a flourishing democracy. We've also advanced our partnerships with regional powers like India and Indonesia, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and many others, all with a view toward reinforcing the rules-based security order that has helped underwrite peace and prosperity throughout the region for decades. But there's more work to be done. We must be ready to confront all challenges from a position of strength and with credible combat power. So I ask this committee to support continued investment to improve our military capabilities. I need weapon systems of increased lethality, precision, speed, and range that are networked and cost-effective. And restricting ourselves with funding uncertainties reduces warfighting readiness, so I urge the Congress to repeal sequestration and to approve the proposed Defense Department budget. Finally, I'd like to thank the Congress for proposing and supporting the Asia-Pacific Stability Initiative. This effort will reassure our regional partners and send a strong signal to potential adversaries of our persistent commitment to the region. As always, I thank Congress for your enduring support to the men and women of PACOM and to our families who care for us. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Let me just remind all members that immediately upon the conclusion of this open hearing, we will have a closed classified session with Admiral Harris. And it will happen immediately after this open hearing has concluded. I know and when we've done this before, there's been some confusion about time, apparently. So whenever we finish here, it will be upstairs as we usually do. Admiral, I appreciate your very strong comments about budgets. Obviously, that's a key importance to us this week, and no one suffers the consequences of our failure to do our job than you do on the front lines. I want to ask my questions on defending against missiles, and actually I want to ask it in 2 different areas. You described some additional forces that we are putting into the region. I know there have been some press reports that say that somehow those forces are not able to defend against missiles launched from North Korea. Let me just ask, can American military forces in that region defend themselves against missiles launched from North Korea?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. There was an article that came out this morning from one of the outlets that suggested that the Carl Vinson Strike Group, and I think it's appropriate that we're talking about the Carl Vinson here in this room, the Carl Vinson room, that the Carl Vinson Strike Group, with its incredible capability to include two guided missile destroyers, the Wayne E. Meyer and the Michael Murphy, and the Lynx Champlain cruiser, that somehow that carrier strike group would not be able to defend itself against ballistic missiles. I believe that article and articles like that are both misleading and they conflate apples and oranges, if you will. We have ballistic missile ships in the Sea of Japan, in the East Sea, that are capable of defending against ballistic missile attacks. North Korea does not have a ballistic missile anti-ship weapon that would threaten the Carl Vinson Strike Group. The weapons that North Korea would put against the Carl Vinson Strike Group are easily defended by the capabilities resident in that strike group. If it flies, it will die if it's flying against the Carl Vinson Strike Group. So I'm confident in that strike group's ability to not only defend itself, but to project power if that is the call that we receive from the President and the Secretary of Defense, sir.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you more broadly about missile defense. We have some limited interceptors in Alaska and California. You mentioned some ships. We are with the South Koreans installing THAAD. So there are several pieces of this. But would you agree with my proposition that we probably need to amp up, to increase our missile defense capability in this region?
I agree with you completely, Mr. Chairman. I believe that across the range of integrated air missile defense, IAMD, that we can and need to do more. I believe that the interceptors that we have that defend our homeland directly in Alaska and California are critical. I have suggested that we consider putting interceptors in Hawaii that defend Hawaii directly, and that we look at the defensive Hawaii radar to improve Hawaii's capability. I believe that the Flight 9 DDGs, destroyers that are coming online, are exactly what were needed in the ballistic missile defense space, if you will. And those are coming online, and I'm grateful to the Congress for funding those.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Focusing on the chairman's question in terms of domestic defense, the missiles in Alaska and in California, what greater capability do we need in those missiles? Do we not have enough? Are we not confident that the ones we have are going to work? What capabilities is it that you're specifically focused on?
Sir, I'm going out of my level of my range of expertise, because that's a question that NORAD is concerned more with, North American Air Defense Command. But I do believe that the numbers could be improved. In other words, we need more interceptors. And then I believe that for the defense of Hawaii, which is covered also by those interceptors, could stand strengthening itself. And that's in terms of the defense of Hawaii radar and potentially interceptors. So that's something we need to study much more deeply, but I think it certainly merits further discussion. We have one of our key systems that's deployed now in the Pacific, the SBX radar. It's an X-band radar that's on an old oil platform that's self-propelled with a golf ball-like antenna. We only have one of those. And we use it a lot, and you know, we have to be concerned about the material condition of the platform itself, which is old, and the civilian crews that man it.
What actions do you potentially see North Korea, Kim Jong-un, taking that are most concerning? And by that, I mean, putting aside for the moment what sort of capability they're building, what might they do offensively militarily? A few years back, I believe they sank a South Korean vessel. They launched some missiles at a South Korean-controlled island. Do you see similar things that North Korea could do? I mean, I don't think any of us anticipate that they're just going to do a full-scale war because they know the cost of that. But are there places where they would try to push the envelope? And if so, what are your concerns about what they might do militarily against either our assets in the region or our allies?
Yeah. Sir, I'm not as certain about this as you are, that North Korea won't do something precipitous because the.
Oh, I'm not saying I'm certain they are. I'm asking what it would be.
Well, I mean, it could be what we've seen before. I mean,
right.
Which provocations like the sinking of the Chonan or the attacks on Waipido Island and the continuing evolution of their nuclear and their ballistic missile testing.
Right.
So all of that.
Just to be clear in the purpose of the question, I'm not at all certain that they're not going to do something. I am confident. Admiral, I'm not certain of anything at this point in my life. It's just the nature of the world. But I am reasonably confident that North Korea sees the threat of launching a full-on war against South Korea or Japan and the consequences of that. What I'm worried about is that they will do these sort of little small things thinking they can get away with it and be wrong. And I'm trying to get a greater clarity of what those small things are, which is why I cited those two previous examples. In the current environment, what are you worried about? Are they likely to once again, try to sink a South Korean ship? Are there disputed territories that they might try to take over? Where should we be looking for that small thing that could lead to the larger, much more dangerous war?
First off, sir, I don't share your confidence that North Korea is not going to attack either South Korea or Japan or the United States or our territories or our states or parts of the United States once they have the capability. I mean,
unprovoked, do you think that?
I won't say that they will, but I don't share your confidence that they won't, with absolute certainty that they won't do that. I think they...
Not absolutely certain, just playing the percentages here, but
right.
Go ahead.
All right. But I believe that we have to look at North Korea as if Kim Jong-un will do what he says. And there's right now there's probably a mismatch between KJU's rhetoric and his capability. He has threatened by name Manhattan, Washington, Colorado, Australia, Hawaii, and there's a capability gap probably in whether he can or not.
And I'm sorry to belabor this point because I want to get on to some other people here, but he's threatened those things in the context of don't mess with us. Has he, or are you saying he simply threatened them as he's going to do it no matter what we do?
Sir, I can't read his mind.
I'm not asking you to read his mind.
All I can do is understand what he says. And when he threatens the United States, then that's one level. But when he threatens the United States with the capability of realizing that threat, that's a different place. And when that happens, that's an inflection point, and we're going to have to deal with that, I believe.
I'll let other folks get in here, and this is probably more for a classified setting, but understanding why he threatens the United States, I think, is enormously important. And again, granting your point that there is no certainty, there is still things that we can learn to understand why those threats are made, and it would definitely inform how we would respond to those threats. So we can do that more in the classified setting. I'll yield back to the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Lamborn.
Admiral, thank you for being here and for your service to our country. If this needs to wait until the classified session, please say so, but one of the needs you highlighted in your written statement was more munitions. We're running short of some critical munitions. Would you want to elaborate on that, or should we be more specific when we go up to the classified?
Sure. I can elaborate on it in general here, and then would ask that we reserve the details for the classified session. In general, we're short on things like small diameter bombs. You know, these are not exciting kinds of weapons. These are mundane sort of weapons, but they're absolutely critical to what we're trying to do, not only in North Korea, against North Korea, but also in the fights in the Middle East. And so we have a shortage of small diameter bombs throughout the inventory. So the stockpile of small diameter bombs that PACOM has, for example, we send them to the fight we're in, and rightfully so, to CENTCOM, to Central Command and AFRICOM. And so that's the fight we're in, and they need them. And so, you know, we send them there, and they use them, which is a good thing. But that means that they're going to be short again, and we're going to send some more. So that's the fight we're in. We're also short in AAW, anti-air warfare weapons like AIM-9X and AIM-120Ds. These are weapons that our fighter aircraft use in air-to-air. I can use more of those. And in a bigger sense, the submarine issue itself. You know, I think our submarine numbers are low and getting smaller. And so the number of submarines, without going into the precise detail here, the Navy can only meet about 50% of my stated requirement for attack submarines. These are SSNs. By the end of the 2020s, and that's based on a submarine force today of 52 SSNs. By the end of the 2020s, that number is going to be down to 42. So the requirement I have is not going to get smaller, but the percentage against the total number of submarines we have is going to be exacerbated because of that. And so those are the kinds of munitions that I worry about. Also, you know, Mark 48 torpedoes and all of that.
Thank you, and I hope we can address those issues seriously in the upcoming fiscal year NDAA and appropriations bills. And lastly, what kind of leverage does China have over North Korea? I don't think it's well understood how much, and they don't, I think, admit to having a lot of leverage, but to outsiders, I think we could benefit from your insight.
Sure. North Korea is China's only treaty ally. So that says one thing right there. Right? So we have 5 bilateral defense treaties. They're all in the Indo-Asia-Pacific, and 2 multilateral treaties, the NATO and the Rio Pact. China has North Korea. So they're obligated by treaty to have this kind of a relationship with North Korea. 80% of North Korea's economy is based on China, exports primarily. So 80% of their economy is based on China. So I believe that's a significant lever that China can employ if it so chose to against North Korea.
Thank you. Appreciate your service once again. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Harris, good to see you again. Thanks for helping us out last year. You're able to, sorry about that, yeah. You're able to come talk to several of us last year, and I appreciate that. I want to explore a little bit more based on Mr. Lamborn's comments, but specific to on the military side, because we discussed sanctions a lot. We discussed the State Department role, Treasury's role, and with regards to North Korea. But I'm wondering if you have any assessment about China's relationship with DPRK on the military side, and if there's influence, or if you're aware of any influence the PLA can play on DPRK with regards to pursuing both a more advanced nuclear weapons program and missile testing.
Yeah, sir, I'm not aware of any direct relationship between the People's Liberation Army and all its various subunits and the DPRK, New People's Army.
Yeah, okay, all right, that's great, thanks. Related as well to our relationship or what we're trying to achieve on the peninsula, are you having, or do you have any advice on whether or not you feel like you're in the position to sort of play every role, that is, not just the Pacific commander, but also somewhat of a diplomatic role, because we have a Secretary of State position, but we don't have Deputy Secretaries of State. We don't have Assistant Secretaries of State. We're only now getting ambassadors without having anyone. So there's a gap in that policy-making structure and that outreach structure. Are you having to fill that gap?
Thanks, sir. You know, I've been accused of many things, but never of being diplomatic. So, but
Yeah,
I try.
All of us here too. Well,
sir.
perhaps me.
Part of the role of the combatant commander is to have relationships with our not only our military counterparts, but also the leadership in the countries and the regions over which we exercise some degree of authority and influence. So I do have relationships with our partner nations, our allies in the region. But, you know, I think the State Department has a key role to play here. You know, I would defer in every case to Secretary Tillerson.
Yeah, and my point isn't that you want to fill that role as much as, for whatever reason, the Senate hasn't confirmed, the administration hasn't put up folks to fill in those spots.
Sure,
and therefore you're left having to fill the gap with your.
And so I'm happy to do what I can in that regard. You know, just recently I was in Thailand and asked to deliver some messages about their return to democracy, which I was happy to do. And I think that's part and parcel of one of the roles of a geographic combatant commander in today's military structure.
Sure, it's also the role of ambassadors and assistant
Yes, sir.
secretaries of state who aren't in place.
Right.
So, and I don't know if you can answer this here, but which is probably a prelude to that you can't answer it here. Yeah, but I have to ask, right? There's the issue of the nuclear tests and the issues of the missile tests. Both of them, obviously, both very concerning. But I guess I'd like to hear your assessment maybe a little later about, is it more concerning to have missile tests or nuclear tests? What's the difference between a 6th nuclear test from North Korea based on the 5th nuclear test as opposed to advances in missile testing?
Yeah, so I view them both very seriously. And the difference between the 6th nuclear test and the 5th nuclear test is if we notice an improvement between the two. So as I said in my opening statement, you know, KGU is not afraid to fail in public, and he fails a lot. Yeah. But I think Edison failed 1,000 times before he got the light bulb to work. Mm-hmm. And so here we are, right? So yeah. He's not afraid to fail in public, and he continues to try. And then he's experimenting not only with, experiment is probably not the right word, he's developing missiles that have solid fuel propellants. And I can talk in the other hearing about the implications of that. So we have that weapons development going on, longer range weapons going on. He has a ballistic missile submarine, an SSB. It's not a BN. It's not nuclear powered, of course, but it's an SSB that's troubling. And then he's doing his nuclear testing. So all of that, if he puts all of that together, miniaturizes the nuclear weapon, puts it on an ICBM that he's testing over here, and then he figures out a way to have that thing survive re-entry, then we have a serious problem on our hands, to go back to Congressman Smith's comments earlier.
Thanks. Your assessment's very important. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, could you talk about the value of joint military exercises with South Korea? It seems that whenever we do them, it seems to excite North Korea. Is there an advantage in terms of doing those?
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. I would say it's critical, right? So we are obliged to defend South Korea by treaty. So South Korea is one of those treaty partners. They have a very strong and capable military, as we do. But if we're going to defend them, or if we're going to fight with them on the peninsula, then we have to be able to integrate with their military. We have to be able to work with their military. We have to understand their military, and vice versa. So we share a lot of common systems. You know, anti-submarine warfare aircraft, Aegis weapon systems on their destroyers and our destroyers and cruisers, and on and on and on. And so we have to be able to operate together in peacetime so that we can operate together in wartime if it comes to that. So we're at an armistice now with, on the peninsula, and that's what we have to do. We have to maintain our degree of readiness, not only unilateral readiness, but also our combined and joint readiness with our brothers and sisters in the ROC military.
To what extent would you say that there was pressure by the Chinese government on South Korea to put pressure on them not to accept the THAAD system?
There is clear pressure from China, economic pressure, against companies like Lotte Corporation, which owns the place that the THAAD is going to go into, Samsung, and other companies, big corporations in South Korea. And so, I find it preposterous that China would try to influence South Korea to not get a weapon system that's completely defensive against the very country that's allied with China. So if China wants to do something constructive, then they ought to focus less, in my opinion, on South Korea's defensive preparations and focus instead more on North Korea's offensive preparations. And I think we're in a good place. I'm reasonably optimistic now that China is having an influence and they're working in the right direction with regards to North Korea, thanks to the efforts by our president and theirs.
Do you think that China holds all the cards in any kind of negotiated settlement to diffuse tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
Sir, I don't think they hold all the cards, but they hold a good number of them and important cards because regardless of whether I think that China's influence on North Korea is waning, it still is the country that has the most influence on North Korea during peacetime. And I think if it came to a harder place, then we would exert the most influence. But in peacetime, China has the most influence on North Korea.
Am I correct that the South Korean, I guess Republic of Korea, security forces have taken operational control of joint military operations and that we do not have forces on the demilitarized zone?
No, sir. The OPCON transfer, the transfer of operational control, that is now pushed to the right, and it's a conditions-based transfer. So the ROK does not have operational control of our forces, but General Brooks, who's the U.S. forces commander, is also the United Nations commander and the CFC, the Combined Forces commander. So he's actually the commander of all of the forces on the peninsula, including the Korean forces, in terms of war.
Is that a goal? Number one, is that a goal, though, operational?
Ultimately, OPCON transfer is a goal, but it has to be conditions-based. It has to be when they're ready to do it and all the other conditions are met.
Okay. Can you speak to whether or not we have, if you can speak in this setting, but do we have conventional forces on the demilitarized zone itself?
We have conventional forces along the demilitarized zone, just south of that, and I can go into more detail in the other session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Harris. I enjoyed meeting you on the Codell recently to Hawaii. On Guam, Admiral, we are directly and uniquely impacted by national security and foreign policy decisions in the region. So we seek to understand what, if any, strategy this administration has for the Indo-Asia-Pacific. We are in the process of realigning Marines from Okinawa throughout the Pacific, which, as you noted in your testimony, is critical for modernizing our force posture in the region. So could you briefly discuss the military's necessity, particularly the movements of Marines to Guam, for which the Japanese are contributing over 1/3 of the cost? You highlighted funding levels, but I'm especially interested in not just the financial, but also the political capital for the government of Japan has expended for its part.
Thanks, Congresswoman. The whole issue of moving Marines from Okinawa elsewhere is important to our alliance relationship with Japan, and so the movement involves. Today we have roughly 20,000 or so Marines in Okinawa, and ultimately we want to get to a point around 10 or 11,000 or so. And part of that is to move about 4,000 Marines to Guam, about 3,000 or so to Hawaii, and then about 1,300 or so to Australia. So that's sort of the rotation. We're looking at, as you know, the movement of the bulk of the Marines to Guam would occur in the 2024 to 2028 timeframe, and then to Hawaii after that. And we're already rotating forces through Australia now. Japan has invested a lot in this. This is all about, for everyone else's benefit, to reducing the footprint in Okinawa and also closing Futenma. So the Futenma Air Base is an air base that in an incredibly populated area, and so the Japanese have asked us to move that air base. It's a key base of operations for us in that region. So what we told the Japanese back in the 90s that we would do that, but their obligations under the treaty is to provide us a place from which to operate. Our obligations under the treaty is to protect Japan. And so their obligation is to provide a place. They selected a place called Hinoko right outside of Camp Schwab, and that's kind of where we are. So ultimately, when Hinoko is ready, we'll shut down Futenma and move to Hinoko. But until then, we have to operate somewhere, and Futenma is where we're operating from. Right. And then part of that agreement was to remove a large number of forces from Okinawa, and that's where the relocation to Guam, Hawaii.
I think, Admiral, what I'm trying to get is everything is on target. Is that correct?
I believe things are on target. I think Hinoko is delayed a little bit. I don't know the amount. Okay. That's something that we'd have to ask the Japanese about. Yeah. But they have said that they would have Hinoko ready by 2022. I testified last year that I thought that was in question. So now I'm going to have to defer to the Japanese for a better year estimate.
Well, we've waited a long time for this, so we wanted to continue. And we do have a visa problem on Guam now, a labor shortage. So I'm working on that. But what importance would you give to the 5th SSN in Guam? Related, would your forces be better enabled by robust ship repair facilities in the Western Pacific? Just a yes or a no.
On the SSN in Guam, I'm a big fan of moving the 5th SSN to Guam. It's a Navy decision, and I'm in consultations with Admiral Richardson and the Navy on it. But I believe it's important that we move that capability forward because it gets it closer to the fight. On the ship repair facility, I simply don't know. I would defer to the Pacific Fleet Commander. It's a Navy issue on whether they need a ship repair facility in Guam or if the facilities in Hawaii and eastward are adequate.
Okay. I have one last question, Admiral. As you know, a decade ago, PACOM issued a yuan for significantly upgraded offensive anti-ship weapons to keep pace with evolving threats. And Congress has funded a rapid acquisition effort to field this capability. With significant munition force shortfalls, I presume the requirements continue to grow. Would that be accurate? And can you discuss the risk we take with the shortfalls in a standoff weapons like the long-range anti-ship missile? If you could just briefly...
Sure. I believe the yuan is as relevant today as it was when PACOM, one of my predecessors, issued it. I think it was Admiral Willard, issued it a decade ago. I'm pleased and grateful to the Congress for funding weapon systems like long-range anti-ship missiles, LRASM, putting money against Advanced Tomahawk and SM-6 in the anti-ship mode. So these are helpful, and this is good, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Admiral, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, how many of China's land-based cruise and ballistic missiles have a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers?
I believe that number is about 95%. In other words, 95% of China's land-based cruise and ballistic missiles, 95% fall in that range and would be precluded by the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF Treaty, if they were a signatory to that treaty, which they're not.
How many land-based cruise and ballistic missiles of that range do you have in your PACOM arsenal?
Sir, I have none in that range in my arsenal, nor does the U.S. Military writ large have that, because we are a signatory to INF, and we follow those rules religiously.
In your opinion, should we consider renegotiation of the INF Treaty or withdrawing and declaring Russia in material breach of the INF Treaty?
Sir, that's a policy question that I know is being looked at, and I believe that there are aspects of the INF Treaty which are salutary. You know, the nuclear part of it that reduces the nuclear weapons and all of that. I am concerned that on the conventional side, both in terms of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, we are being taken to the cleaners by countries that are not signatories to the INF, because, you know, there's no expectation, right? We should have no expectation that China follow the INF because they're not a signatory to it. On the other hand, General Selva has recently testified that Russia has violated the conventional part of the INF. And so the INF treaty is just us and Russia and a few of the other Soviet successor states, but it's really about us and Russia. And so Russia doesn't adhere to it as strictly as we do. China and other countries, Iran, for example, don't have an obligation to follow it, and they're proceeding apace in their weapons development. The DF-21, DF-26, for example, both would be precluded by INF. And then here we are without a weapon in this 500 to 5,500 kilometer range, a critical range to be able to conduct warfare in the Indo-Asia-Pacific.
So my understanding is you're saying that we're basically unilaterally disarming when it comes to that capability.
I would say we're unilaterally not being creative in developing our weapons.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Harris. Good to see you again. Just want to follow up on your comments to Mr. Lamborn regarding the need for submarines to fill the requirements that you have out there. Again, you mentioned we have a fleet today of 52 going down to 41 in the 2020s. Your testimony on page 16 actually tallied the number of submarines between Russia, North Korea, and China today, which is 160, which again, I think helps sort of frame your comments even more sharply. And last December, Secretary Mabus came out with his force structure assessment, which called, again, for an increase in the fleet size to 355. Mr. Whitman and I just got back a report from CBO a few days ago that talked again about the sort of fiscal challenge of trying to achieve that goal. If you had to prioritize, again, in terms of the fleet architecture about, you know, as we find our way forward to hit that target, you know, what end of the fleet would you really want to emphasize in terms of new platforms to be available?
Right. So I'm not a fleet guy anymore. I'm a joint guy. But from a joint combatant commander perspective, I need more submarines. And so in the Navy's plan to build up to 355 ships, 66 of those are submarines. And right now we're at 52 going to 42. And that's completely in the wrong direction. And if we go from 52 to 42 to 66, that would make me a happy combatant commander, because I would think then that in that number of 66 that I would be able to meet more of the requirements that I'm able to have met now. So I'm really, right now I'm at 50% of my stated requirement. It'll be worse, it'll be exacerbated when we go down to 42, but if we go up to 66, that'll be better. But that number is an important number because it highlights the shortfalls that we are currently in with regards to not only submarines but other assets. So in that 355 ship number is a 12th aircraft carrier and all the ships that go with that. I think these are really important as we move out to face the threats that are going to confront us beyond those that already are extant now. And while we're doing this, China and Russia are significantly improving their submarine capabilities and their anti-submarine warfare capabilities. So today there's no comparison. I mean, it would be like comparing a Model T to a Corvette. But there's no comparison between a U.S. Virginia-class submarine and anything that China can field. But that's not the point. The point is that in 20 years or so, China will work hard to close that technological gap. And if we don't continue to resource our submarine fleet and our military in general, then they will be able to close that gap. And that would put us I think, in a bad place.
Another point in your testimony on page 10 was, again, talking about Russia's more aggressive posture in Asia-Pacific. Again, the Pacific Fleet now is a new development in terms of, again, this whole question of your ability to meet requirements. Isn't that correct, that they're now back in business?
Yes, sir,
Yeah.
it is.
Thank you. Last week, I had an opportunity to go out and visit one of our Seawolf class subs, which were part of the pivot to Asia, the USS Connecticut, believe it or not. And I raised that point because that sub actually was supposed to be in for repair availability it was a big job. It was supposed to be about 2 years. It ended up being 4 years. And again, it's because of this whole question of the Navy's strain in terms of the public shipyards. I mean, again, that's another part of this story in terms of your ability to get your requirements met when, again, the pipeline in terms of repairs is just not moving fast enough. And again, that obviously was a pretty key platform that you could use right now, I'm assuming.
It is, and so the numbers are affected. The numbers that I get, as opposed to the numbers that I've asked for in terms of submarines, are driven not only by the number of submarines, so that's the easy answer, 52 spread out across all the combatant commanders, but it's also driven by availability, and the availability is driven by the industrial base and its capacity to repair the submarines that are going in for overhauls and all of that.
Right. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Admiral.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to hone in the questions on China some more and also readiness. So China has been investing in several next-generation military technologies, including hypersonic missiles, directed energy weapons, autonomous weapon systems, and space-based weapons. Now, are you concerned about the progress China is making in its development of these technologies, and how can the United States maintain its edge?
Without going into classified, I'll answer yes to all of that. I am very concerned about their developments in these systems, particularly hypersonics. What we can do is to develop our own hypersonic weapons and improve our defenses against theirs. One of the problems we have, though, is this INF treaty issue before. So hypersonics, that could match the Chinese weapons would be precluded by the INF. So we're precluded from developing land-based weapons that can match the Chinese land-based weapons by treaty.
Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'm glad my colleague brought that up. We need to address that for sure. What is your assessment of China's use of hybrid warfare methods, and how does China influence or otherwise affect our Asian partners and our allies?
Yeah, so I believe that China is a learning machine. They're a learning organism, and they have watched the Russian example in Ukraine, and they are applying aspects of that in the South China Sea, particularly with their maritime militia, which is a compilation of fishing boats, merchant ships, and other small ships and entities that roam throughout the South China Sea. And they're using these in lieu of great hull, military ships. And I think they're having some effect with them, and we need to continue to monitor that activity and to call them on the carpet when they do something that's that would be counter to good seamanship and the like.
In addition to their economic strategy, which I'm very concerned about too, very shrewd on their part. But I want to move to readiness. So we've heard from the service chiefs and vice service chiefs of all the military branches, and there are a few common themes, such as due to our inability to modernize our forces, our adversaries have closed the capability gap we once enjoyed. They also shared the quality and quantity of training opportunities have declined significantly over the past several years, which has decreased our readiness. And they have talked about how our forces are undermanned. So I'm wondering how these factors have affected you in PACOM.
So today, I believe I can meet the strategy in terms of fight-tonight forces. And so that involves, principally we're worried about North Korea. So my forces are ready to fight tonight if called on to do that. What the readiness shortfalls and the challenges that the services have and how that affect me is on follow-on forces. So, the fight tonight is really, literally, it's tonight. But a lot of those forces, though, come from the mainland United States. And so that's an issue. And then the follow-on forces, the surge forces, how good is our airlift? How good is our sea lift? How can we get all this stuff out there? And I worry about that quite a bit. And I think the lack of a budget is going to hurt us if we don't get one.
Hopefully we will address that this week. Now, you've talked a little bit about the South China Sea and what they're doing, and China's attempts at land reclamation and expansion in that area, coupled with its growing military capabilities, as you know, are causing tension across the globe. If these tensions continue to rise to the point where military confrontation is necessary, are you confident in both the quality and quantity of forces you will receive from the services? And will you have enough weapons and assets with access to the threat in order to reduce the risk to our forces and maximize their capability?
So I can get into more details in the classified hearing on that. But I am concerned about China's bases in the South China Sea, because that complicates the anti-access air denial problem that we face if we're called upon to conduct operations against China.
Great. I'll look forward to visiting with you in the classified setting. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you very much for joining us here today. I was the gentleman who asked Vice Chairman Selva about the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the treaty that President Reagan signed in the mid-1980s with the Soviet Union. So I wanted to start with that, following on my colleagues' questions. What has been our response to Russia's violation of the treaty?
Sure, I don't know what our...
I'm not aware of a response either.
I know that General Selva brought it up.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any response either. Typically, when one party to a treaty violates the treaty, what do you try to do? You try to hold that party accountable. So there are other options than simply withdrawing from the treaty ourselves. Is that right?
Right.
Have we thought about having such a treaty with China as well?
I have not, and I'm not aware of discussions that would bring China into either the existing INF treaty or a separate treaty with China. When the INF treaty was signed back in '85, it was a bilateral treaty in a bipolar world. Now we're in a multipolar world with threats that we weren't thinking about in 1985.
I agree. I think President Reagan would be pretty shocked to hear that our initial response to Russia's violation of the treaty would be simply to abrogate the treaty ourselves. But I want to go back to North Korea. The Trump administration has said that, quote, all options are on the table regarding a preemptive military strike. What range of options do we have?
We have the full range of options, whether it's continued negotiations, continued...
sorry, Admiral, specifically military options. I mean, what effective military options would we have to counter the North Korean threat with a preemptive strike?
The full range of options on the military side, whether it's presence operations, pressure operations, or kinetic operations.
I'm asking specifically about a preemptive strike.
Okay?
Not about continued pressure, not diplomatic pressure, not the presence of our submarines or carriers, but what sorts of preemptive strike options do we have against the North Koreans?
I'll just say, sir, that we have a lot of preemptive options, but I couldn't begin to talk about them in this hearing.
And what would a typical response, you think, be from the North Koreans to such a preemptive strike?
Depends on the level of the preemptive strike, sir.
Would we be able to take out their artillery aimed at Seoul?
I believe that we would have the ability to affect North Korea's military calculus in preemptive strikes, depending on the type of strike. But I'm really treading on.
I'm not asking you to get into anything classified. There's been a lot of unclassified material about this.
But nothing for me.
But my concern, Admiral, is that when you look at the options that we have in terms of a preemptive strike, there's not a lot we can do about North Korea's artillery, and this has been well discussed in the open press. That a lot of South Koreans and Americans in South Korea might die if that option were exercised. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would say that what we're faced with is that on one hand, and a lot more Koreans and Japanese and Americans dying if North Korea achieves its nuclear aims and does what KGU has said it's going to do.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But just to be clear, in that scenario, a lot of South Koreans and Americans in South Korea would be in trouble.
Sure.
What are you concerned about a conflict between North and South Korea escalating into a conflict between the United States and China? Is that a risk?
It is a risk. I think it's a manageable risk, and I think that we would work hard to manage that risk.
How would we manage that risk?
I think communications with China, a relationship with China. I think the relationship between President Trump and President Xi is positive and encouraging, and I think that will go a long way to
so you're basing that off.
ameliorating the risk.
So you're basing that off their recent meeting.
No, not just a recent meeting. I'm basing it on the idea that if we have a positive, productive relationship with China, then
I agree with you. The Trump administration's idea throughout the campaign and until that meeting was to have an unproductive relationship with China, to call them a currency manipulator, et cetera. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, thank you very much for you being here today. And 2 years ago, I had the extraordinary opportunity of visiting with you in Hawaii, and I saw firsthand of your capabilities and the briefings that you provided us, your rapport with your personnel. It was just very, very inspiring. And your personal history and background is equally so inspiring to the American people, and I want to thank you for your service. I particularly say that as a grateful dad of a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy today, serving in Beaufort, South Carolina, hopefully maybe in PACOM sometime in the future. As we face these issues, North Korea continues to be a significant threat to the security of the American people and our allies in the region. Can you explain how important it is the recent deployment of the THAAD system is to the people of South Korea?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I mean, this system is a defensive system that will help protect South Korea from ballistic missile attacks from North Korea. It is a purely defensive system. It's aimed north, not east, or not west, rather. It poses no threat to China, and it's designed to protect our Korean allies and our American servicemen and women and their families and businessmen and others who live and work in Korea.
And I want you to be aware that Congress voted 2 weeks ago, overwhelmingly 398 to 3 bipartisan, obviously, to support the THAAD deployment and your service and back you up. And so you've got obviously incredible bipartisan support here in Congress. As North Korea continues to develop and test ballistic missile technology, can you explain who is supporting these activities with resources? Specifically, is there Iranian collaboration?
Sir, I don't know if there's Iranian collaboration or not, but I'll find out and get back to you on that, or I'll have an answer about the classified hearing.
Thank you very much. And Admiral, the President has recently stated that all options are on the table concerning North Korea, as correctly cited by Congressman Seth Moulton just now. As Chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, I'm concerned of noted shortages in funding, required munitions, and backlog maintenance on our ships and aircraft. What readiness concerns have you seen in the Pacific Command?
Just what you've said, sir. I'm concerned about munitions shortfalls, maintenance backlogs, and development of weapons that will keep us ahead of our adversaries, principally China and Russia, but that would have an effect in North Korea.
And
Yes,
are there specific shortfalls in munitions that that we can help address here?
There are small diameter bombs, AIM-9X and AIM-120D, AAW, anti-air warfare weapons, and Mark 48 torpedoes.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Harris, for coming here today. The administration has sent the USS Michigan to South Korea as a show of force and continues to escalate its rhetoric against the current leader of North Korea. There is no question as to the significant threat North Korea poses on the region, especially as it continues to pursue its missile and nuclear ambition. However, I am extremely concerned about the provocation and direction this administration is taking to address the North Korea threat. It seems the United States has not developed a coherent national strategy when it comes to North Korea, and yet we are deploying military assets, increasing tensions, and considering military options against North Korea. When dealing with an unpredictable regime, empty rhetoric can be dangerous. And I think this committee would be interested to hear why there was so much confusion as to where the USS Carl Vinson was deployed to or not. Admiral Harris, what is the feasibility of the U.S. taking on North Korea without China becoming involved? What type of coalition effort would be required to take military action against North Korea? Denuclearization at this point seems unachievable unless the U.S. wages an outright war against North Korea or North Korea undergoes a regime change. What are the other options other than denuclearization are you and the administration looking at in order to limit the North Korean threat? Quite the question.
Sure. Thanks, sir. That's quite a number of questions. I'll try to get through them. First is, I disagree that we lack a strategy on North Korea, sir. I believe we do have a strategy. I believe the President has that strategy. And my job is to provide options. And as a military commander, then my job is to provide military options. And that's what I do, and that's what I have done. With regard to the Carl Vinson, that's my fault on the confusion, and I'll take the hit for it. So I made the decision to pull the Carl Vinson out of Singapore, truncate the exercise that it was going to do south of Singapore, cancel its port visit to Australia, and then proceed north. And where I failed was to communicate that adequately to the press and the media. So that is all on me. But we've done exactly that, right? So we canceled pulled it out of Singapore, truncated the exercise, canceled the port visit, and then moved it north. And today it sits in the Philippine Sea just east of Okinawa in striking range and power projection range of North Korea if called upon to do that. And then in a few days, I expect it'll continue to move north. You started your questions by talking about the Michigan. The USS Michigan and SSGN, a guided missile nuclear-powered submarine, is in fact in Busan, Korea now, as a show of solidarity with our Korean allies. It'll be there for a few days, and then it will leave port and be operating in the area. This is a show of solidarity with our South Korean allies and a flexible deterrent show of force to North Korea, should they consider using force against South Korea. With regard to coalition effort, I believe our biggest coalition partner in this effort, if it comes to some kinetic operation on the peninsula, is Korea itself, naturally, South Korea. And then, of course, Japan and our other friends, allies, and partners in the region, I feel would support the United States as we support our treaty ally of South Korea.
I guess the only question I continue to have is it's been difficult to discern that strategy. And I'm hoping at some point we can hear a little bit more, whether it be in a classified hearing or not. But to date, I don't have the confidence to feel good about the statement you just made that we do have a coherent strategy.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, I'm over here.
Thanks, sir.
It's good to see you again. Before I get started, I just wanted to tell you there were 15 of us that met 2 weeks ago with General Brooks in Seoul, and I think we all came away from there understanding the seriousness of the situation, but we had 100% confidence in his leadership and the troops he has under his command and where he's going with that, and I just wanted to say that after having an hour and a half with him that day. Last year, you and I visited in Hawaii at the RIMPAC exercise, and I think 2 hours you spent with the 8 of us that were there, I just got to tell you, that was a tour de force. Rarely in my lifetime have I been in the room with somebody who had such complete command over everything that you were talking to us about over an incredibly broad and diverse theater. So I wanted to compliment you on that. You and I had a little bit of a colloquy about the littoral combat ship, and you were telling me about how it helped you increase and distribute your lethality in the theater, and you reminisced about the days when you were a young naval commander and you were dealing with the Soviet corvettes, the little smaller vessels that the Soviets had that they could put a missile on. And you were very good about going over with me and the others there about having that small combatant out there, particularly now that we can put Harpoon missiles on them and add to what you're doing. 2 months ago, I was in Singapore, and I noticed that you had an LCS and some EPFs there. Last week, Admiral Gabrielson stated, we're ready and excited to welcome multiple LCSs to the region and put them to work, and there's no shortage of meaningful work for these ships. Can you discuss the impact of having the LCSs and the EPFs in the theater?
Yes, sir. So I've gone on record as being a fan of the littoral combat ship in both its principal forms, and I am a fan of it. I would be a bigger fan of the upgunned, if you will, LCSs, which...
the frigate?
The frigate, thanks to the Congress we're going to get. And I think it's important. I want to acknowledge our great friend in Singapore, or Singapore as our great friend, that is, who allow us to rotationally deploy these ships to their country. So I'm grateful for that. I think the Navy and Vice Admiral Roden at Surface Forces, are on the right track with this theory of distributed lethality. And I think the LCS has a role to play in that. So again, I'm a fan of LCS. The story I told was when I was a tactical action officer on the USS Saratoga back in the 80s, one of my jobs was to keep track of all these little ships that the Soviets had, the Munitions, Tarantulas, and Osa-2 boats. These are small patrol boats. But the reason we had to keep track of them, the reason we were worried about them, the reason the captain and the admiral were on my case all the time, where are these guys, is because each one carried a Styx missile or more. So they carried a missile that could threaten the carrier and the carrier strike group, punching far, far above their weight. And I think that LCS should do that. And I want the Chinese every day to worry about where the LCS is, just like I used to worry about where the Osas, the Nuchkas, and Tarantulas were back in the 80s.
Well, I think the proposal from the Navy, or at least the way they're working on it today, both variants of the LCS, upgraded to be a frigate, would have multiple missile tubes on them and would be able to respond the way that you said. So just to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, you want them to have the sort of missile capability that the Navy's trying to get to with the new frigate design.
Absolutely, and I'm agnostic onto the type of missile. You know, that's a service decision. But I want them to be equipped with missiles that can sink ships.
And having multiple numbers of those, not just, we only have the Coronado out there right now, but having more than one, having several out there that you can place around wherever you want, that adds to what the Chinese or any other adversary has to worry about with the placement of our fleet out there.
Right. On a combat side, it does it absolutely. And on the everyday non-combat peace operations, humanitarian assistance, the whole range of operations and missions that the Navy has in the region, the LCS adds to that.
Well, I really appreciate your comments on that, but once again, your leadership, General Brooks' leadership, I have a high level of confidence that we have the right people and the right things in place to do what we've got to do if something bad happens there, and I appreciate your leadership and his leadership, and I yield back.
Mr. Swazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you so much for your testimony today, and thank you for your service to our country. You said that the Carl Vinson is now in the Philippine Sea. God forbid you had to fly from the Carl Vinson to North Korea. How long a flight time is that?
About 2 hours, well within their capability.
And there wouldn't be any need for refueling to get there and back?
They would be, but a modern carrier strike group has its own refuelers.
On
the ship.
Okay. Right. When you talked about the basic munitions like small diameter bombs, is that a problem throughout the Navy, or is that a problem for just the Pacific Command?
No, it's not a Navy problem. It's a joint force problem, and it's a shortage across the joint force. And so, you know, we're sending them out to CENTCOM, Central Command, now because they're needed in the fight in the Middle East. So, you know, I have an allocation, other combatant commanders have an allocation.
So you're sharing your allocation with the Central Command?
Right, except they don't share them back, right? Hopefully they don't share them back, because hopefully they use them. And so then they'll need more.
So how would I go about finding out, like, what's the status of that? What's the inventory overall and where they are and that kind of thing?
You just ask the question, and I'll get back to you, sir.
So I'm asking that
just
question.
did, and I'll get back to you.
And what were the other two weapons that you mentioned before that were your priorities other than these small diameter bombs?
Anti-air warfare missiles, AAW missiles, AIM-9X, AIM-120D. These go on our fighter aircraft, and Mark 48 torpedoes.
So I'd like to, I'm trying to develop, I'm new here, I've only been here for 100 days, and I'm trying to develop an inventory of all the different equipment that we have and understand where things are and how much we use of what.
Yes, sir, I'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Harris, for being here. One, just again, it is a joint problem, the number of munitions and the lackage of stockpile that we have in order to comply with all contingency that we would have at this time. Is that correct, Admiral Harris, from your opinion? And then I want to go back just a little bit to the leader of North Korea. And to the ranking member's questions, like you, I don't share the same confidence that he understands the cost-benefit analysis of any actions towards the United States. And I thank you for being on the front lines, you and all our service members for being on the front lines every day. Do you know of any source other than, I guess, maybe China, but do you think, based on the news sources and the people around him that are his advisors, do you think he gets any advice that he cannot totally annihilate the United States? Do you think there's any source that he gets that from?
I do not. In his circle of advisors, you know, they pretty much, you know, follow his line, or he pretty much eliminates the source of distrust or questioning.
I was with some friends when I was on the district work period, and I said, you know, some people think that God controls their actions or directs their actions, or that they're in link with God's actions. It's almost like he's a little more than that. He may even think he's God based on the number of advisors, and if you in any way go against what he says is right, he has you killed, whether you be his brother or his uncle or anyone else. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, sir.
The number of ships, and I know, but how does that impact PACOM directly in an unclassified area, the lack of submarines and other surface ships?
Well, as I've said before, the Navy fulfills about 50% of my stated submarine needs. And so the submarine force, in an unclassified way, for example, deal with the Russian submarine threat, the Chinese submarine threat, and they're also involved in surveillance missions and other kinds of missions themselves directly for Pacific Fleet, for the fleet, if you will. And so because of the numbers of Chinese submarines that are underway and the types of submarines, and the same with the Russians, you know, I need to be able to keep track of those submarines in every way that I can. And by not having the number of submarines that I need to do that, then I have to make risk calculations and risk-based decisions on which ones to maybe not keep track of, or what surveillance missions we're not going to do because I don't have the submarine to do that. I need it to do something else. So those kinds of calculations are being done in real time every day, not only by me and by the PACOM staff, but by Admiral Swift and the Pacific Fleet staff and on down the chain. So that's just one example. You know, right now the Carl Vinson is on deployment. I extended the Carl Vinson by a month in order to ensure that we have a carrier available should the President need one, because the carrier that's based in the Western Pacific, the Ronald Reagan, is in maintenance right now. And so, you know, I wouldn't have a carrier there right now were it not for the ability to extend the Carl Vinson. So, you know, that's just two examples for you right there.
And when I first got into the military many years ago, we always had a 5-paragraph operations off order. And lately, you know, 10 years ago, we started adding risk. And that is a risk that we as Congress can source to reduce some of that risk. But we have the same, we ought to be doing the same risk assessment. If we don't source this, then you take risk, and that means lives and material and equipment and treasure. Would that be correct, Admiral Harris?
Absolutely correct.
And then final question. We hear quite often about the funding at the Joint Chief level, the CRs and the impacts of CRs at the joint level. But at your level as a commander, or the PACOM commander, how significant is it to have funding that you can plan on to make sure we have the right strategic plans in place?
Sir, it's very significant. And, you know, just in broad brush because of time, if we don't get a budget, or if we go into another CR, the services are going to start to enact some draconian measures in order to balance their books, right? And that includes things like they're going to cut back on carrier air wing training, which means that the pilots that deploy won't be ready to deploy. The Air Force is going to cut back over 100,000 flight hours across the Air Force. The Army will cut back exercises, important exercises like Pacific Pathways and things like that, in order to balance those books. And that will have an effect on the combatant commanders directly and on me directly in the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral Harris, thank you very much for your service and for being with us today. I wanted to ask you, and this is somewhat in line with some of the questions that people have been asking, partly because I think it's what the public right now is looking for. In your testimony, you said that your goal is to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses, but not bring him to his knees. And in light with that, what are you and General Brooks doing to reduce tensions on the peninsula specifically and prevent what some people are concerned could be an overreaction on our part?
So I believe the best way to reduce tensions on the Korean Peninsula is to provide credible combat power 24/7. So if you are a weak country or you have a weak military, then I think that encourages adventurism and puts us in a place with countries like North Korea that we wouldn't want to be in if we had a choice. So we have a choice. And General Brooks and I provide those options up the chain to the president, but within our own areas of authority, then we provide that credible combat power to our allies in Japan and Korea. So bringing the Vinson up is one example of that. Bringing the USS Michigan guided missile nuclear submarine into Busan is another example of that. These B-1 and B-52 flights that we fly throughout the area are another example of credible combat power, which I believe has the effect of ameliorating Kim Jong-un's worst impulses.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you could share with us regarding your own work essentially with the White House through some of these escalations?
No, ma'am. I would be hesitant to share with you discussions that I've had with the National Command Authority.
Thank you, sir. I also wanted to turn to the budget discussions that we've been having here, which are critically important. In fact, in your testimony, you listed budget uncertainty as a noteworthy challenge next to China, Russia, territorial disputes, North Korea, and ISIS. And when General Milley was here just a few weeks ago, he talked about the fact that what he views here in Congress actually is professional malpractice if we don't pass this budget and get on with this important work. I suspect you probably share that sentiment in some way?
I wouldn't be quite as forthcoming as General Milley is, ma'am.
Uh-huh. But it's a real critical need.
I'll say that the need is there without criticizing the Congress by name.
Congress.
But the need.
But sometimes that's appropriate, right?
Okay. Please note I'm silent on that. The need, though, is real. I believe we must have a budget, and I believe we must repeal sequestration.
Yeah,
otherwise, it's going to put us in a very bad place. And those signals I was talking about earlier, the signals that I talked about earlier with North Korea and all of that, the KGU will interpret that in a bad way.
Yeah. One of the things you just said in response to my colleague is that you think that commanders are going to start taking some draconian measures.
I think the services are. When I say the commander, it's the services, because they have to man, train, and equip the military for the use of the joint force. But when I say the services, I mean the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Is there something that you see, and maybe even in some trends, that we continue to do that, in fact, given some other technologies or changes, that we don't need to do any longer?
I'd have to think about that a little bit. I think that in terms of R&D, research and development, that we are in fact looking at new ways of doing new business. And I think the third offset, for example, is getting at some of that DIUX. I don't know what that stands for, but it sounds cool. The DIUX is another way to try to jumpstart some ideas. And I think these are all helpful. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the Department of Defense is looking at innovation as a means to overcome some of the challenges that we face from other countries.
Could I ask you just briefly, because time is almost up, is the fact that we've struggled so much to have an audit out of the Pentagon, is that an issue for you?
No, ma'am, it's not for me.
So no audit is not a problem?
No, I don't want to imply that, but if there's a problem with an audit in the Pentagon, that doesn't affect me as a combatant commander directly.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral Harris, thank you for your leadership and what you're doing and your diplomacy and tact towards Congress. I thank you for that, but I would say it would be professional malpractice if we don't get a budget passed and take care of our military right. I wanted to get your professional opinion for the committee here, just how hard it is and challenging to defend South Korea with the location of Seoul and the number of artillery that North Korea has. Could you just go into a little detail, just the challenges that we're going to face if Kim Jong-un becomes aggressive?
Yeah, it's a very dramatic challenge. So Seoul is, I believe, the most densely populated city on the planet. 25 million people in a relatively small area, within artillery range of the DMZ and the heights north of the DMZ where Kim Jong-un has a vast array of rocket forces and artillery. So it does pose a significant challenge.
That's an extraordinary hard challenge to counter.
Right.
Do you think we have enough long-range strike aircraft, air-to-ground, air-to-air, close enough that deters Kim Jong-un, or do we need to add additional permanent presence in Japan, Guam, so forth, that he will lose across this line?
I believe that the military forces we have are sending the right signal to Kim Jong-un. So we routinely fly B-1 and B-52 flights. Just 2 days ago, we had an operation where we had a ship in the East Sea, Sea of Japan, and on the West Sea with the Koreans. The Japanese were involved, and we had a B-52 fly through there. The Japanese handed off to the Koreans, who then escorted the bomber through the Korean Peninsula to the other side. So this is a pretty complicated operation, and it demonstrated to our allies and friends, and also to Kim Jong-un, that we have this capability, that we can bring these forces to bear from all around the Pacific to focus on him if need be. So I'm pleased with the array of forces that we have in terms of fight-tonight forces. But as I answered a previous question, I am concerned about follow-on forces and the means to get them there, all of which is affected by readiness, which is affected by the budget, and on and on.
Seems to me part of this is a whole government response. Are we doing enough in the non-military instruments of power? For example, in the 90s, we used banking sanctions that I thought were very effective. Are there other things we should be doing to help put pressure on North Korea?
Yeah, sir, I believe that it is a whole government effort, and a whole government effort would be required. And I believe that the different parts of our government are involved in the North Korean problem set.
Should we go back to the banking sanctions? Seems like to me that worked.
Sir, I'm not smart on banking sanctions.
Okay.
So
one last thing. Thinking of Kim Jong-un, he's the grandson of a dictator, son of a dictator. He's been surrounded by people his whole life that tell him what he wants to hear. So we sort of question his rational decision-making on this. But how would you interpret his strategic objectives? What is he trying to pursue? What's his goals with his behavior?
So I believe there's an element of respect that he's going after. I believe he wants to be considered a nuclear state, a nuclear capable state. I believe he seeks unification of the Korean Peninsula to his favor, and I believe that he seeks to have that dominance in that part of the world.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time. I yield back.
Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Harris, aloha, welcome.
Aloha.
I've just returned back to Washington yesterday after holding a whole string of town hall meetings across the state of Hawaii on each island. And the question and concern raised about North Korea's threat, yes, to the United States, but specifically to Hawaii, was a constant question and theme that came up on each of our islands there. Given Hawaii is home to your headquarters, how do you characterize the threat of North Korea specifically to Hawaii, and how confident are you in our current BMD capabilities against that threat?
Yeah, thanks, Congresswoman. I am concerned about it. I believe that our ballistic missile architecture is sufficient to protect Hawaii today, but it can be overwhelmed. And you know, if Kim Jong-un or someone else launched ballistic missiles, ICBMs against the United States, and then you know, someone would have to make the decision on which ones to take out or not. So that's a difficult decision. I think that we would be better served. My personal opinion is that we would be better served with a defensive Hawaii radar and interceptors in Hawaii. I know that that's being discussed. I don't want to get ahead of those discussions, but I think we ought to study it for sure, and then make that decision as a department what the best way forward is. But Kim Jong-un is clearly in a position to threaten Hawaii today, in my opinion.
Thank you. And in what you're suggesting, having a radar as well as interceptors in Hawaii specifically, how confident are you in that technology that's being discussed in being able to effectively intercept an ICBM coming towards us?
It depends on the systems. You know, I'm getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit because, you know, I'm suggesting that we study the basing of interceptors in Hawaii. The type of interceptors, you know, that's the next level of detail, which I'm not part of that discussion. I think that the Defense of Hawaii radar is coming. I think the interceptors piece is something that's yet to be determined. But I believe we should certainly look at it, and I think we'd be somehow not doing our job if we didn't look at it.
And could you expand a little bit on what you mentioned on the current BMD capability being sufficient, but if overwhelmed, would create a situation where difficult choices would be made? Could you maybe spell out a scenario?
In this hearing room, I'll just say that we have X number of interceptors that can shoot down Y number of targets, and if the opposition fired Y plus 1, then that's at least one. Yeah. That will get through.
Thank you. Recently, I think about a month ago, the acting Assistant Secretary of State made a statement basically saying that the pivot to Asia is effectively over. What is your take on that statement, and how have you seen the practical implications of that?
Yeah, so I believe that the phrase was, you know, the term pivot and the term rebalance, those are just words that describe what America is doing. And I believe that what we are doing is continuing to place an importance on the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. I believe that Secretary Mattis's first trip was to the region. The Vice President, I was with him when he returned from the region through Hawaii. I believe that these send the right signal to our friends, allies, and partners and others that the United States remains steadfast in our placing of the Indo-Asia-Pacific region as the most important region for America's future. I think the President's relationships with Prime Minister Abe in Japan, with President Xi in China, and all of that are positive. And it demonstrates to the folks out there that we do value what's happening in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. Even though the terms, quote unquote, pivot or rebalance or something may be out of vogue, I think our nation remains focused on the region, as we should.
Yeah, it's what's actually happening that matters. I appreciate your leadership through your long tenure of service based in Hawaii, but really always bringing to light the challenges as well as the opportunities that we face there in the region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Cheney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for your service to the country and for your very frank answers and helpful answers here today. I wanted to follow up first on some questions about the INF Treaty and see if you could elaborate a little bit on the extent to which that treaty is now only, in fact, prohibiting the United States, only binding us in many ways if the Russians are violating it and if the Chinese are moving ahead in the production of weapons that we can't produce under that treaty.
Yeah, I think you've said it all in my concern. So the INF Treaty doesn't affect China's weapons development or any other country's weapons development with the exception of ours and Russia's, because they're not signatories to the treaty. It's a bilateral treaty signed in 1985 during a bipolar world, us and the Soviet Union, and then now Russia and some of the republics that have come out from that. I don't know if Russia is wholesale violating the treaty. I do know that General Selva testified that they have violated it in certain aspects. So we should hold them to account for that. On the nuclear side of the INF Treaty, I believe it's holding, and I would be hesitant to call for us to pull out of the treaty because anything you can do to limit nuclear weapons is a good. But the treaty not only governs nuclear weapons, but also conventional weapons in the ballistic missile and the ballistic and cruise missile regimes. And that's what I'm worried about. So I'm worried about Chinese weapons and what we're going to do about it. So we can't stop the Chinese from developing weapons that run counter to INF because they're not a signatory to INF. But we can't develop weapons that can match those because we are a signatory to it, and we follow it like you'd expect America to follow a treaty to the letter.
Thank you. And in particular, one of those kinds of weapons that they're developing that we are precluded from developing are the hypersonic weapons. Is that right? And could you talk a little bit about missile defense against hypersonic weapons in terms of, what the capabilities are, if any, that we might have today?
Yeah, I really don't want to get into that in this hearing. Happy to discuss it in the classified session.
Okay, thank you. In terms of missile defense and our allies, is there more that we could be doing, for example, with respect to the sale of Aegis Ashore sites or THAAD to Japan?
Yeah, I believe that there is more that we can do, and we should make available, I think, those systems to the countries that are our allies and close friends that would want them. I don't want to get into a discussion with Japan, for example, on what's better. I think they can make that decision, but we should encourage them to go down that path. I think that that within our treaty structure, our alliance structure in Northeast Asia, for example, one of the things that could be done, which we can improve on, is the relationship between Japan and South Korea. Right? They both have Aegis weapon systems. They both have Patriot. They both have ballistic missile defense, and they need to get along better. And I'm happy to report that they are. That we're having an effect in that, and they recognize the need to do this, and the relationship between both of them and the trilateral relationship is improving, which is helpful.
And then just a little bit more on China. It has long been sort of the policy, including in the previous administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, today, that we need to get the Chinese to put pressure on North Korea, as you've discussed it at some length here. But could you talk a little bit about what you see as their real interest? I mean, if you look at the developments that they're making to prevent us from access in the same area, how much do we really think we could count on them in terms of some of their interests seem very aligned with the North Koreans' interests?
I think that in regards to the peninsula, the Korean peninsula, China's interests include they don't want to see a North Korean regime that collapses, and they have a refugee problem from the millions of North Koreans that would probably head into China. So that's one problem. They don't want to see a unified peninsula that's unified with Seoul, Korea as its core. They don't want an American ally on their borders. So that's problematic for them. So those are I think they're historically their big concern with what's happening on the peninsula, and that has driven their actions. That has driven them to be helpful in some points and less helpful in others, both in terms of actual things and in the temporal sense. But I think that President Trump has convinced President Xi that there are other benefits to having a denuclearized North Korea, and it's to China's benefit that it be that way, and then we'll go forward and see where it goes. And I think it's early days for sure. But China seems to be helpful here, and I want to acknowledge that and be optimistic.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. O'Halloran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Harris, thank you for being here today, and really want to thank you and all of your women and men underneath your command. I'm going to get off of the subjects that we'll deal with in the classified meeting, but I want to go back to ISIS for a second. You had mentioned that there were ISIS-inspired terrorism in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. These countries don't have the best history as far as being able to adapt to those types of situations, and there are countries also that are within your area that could be helpful in the future. How do you see this developing as far as if ISIS does get in there, how do we address that situation? And how confident are you that they are able to address it themselves or need our help?
So I'm encouraged by the activities of those countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, principally because they understand the problem set. One of the subordinate commands to PACOM, Special Operations Command Pacific, or SOCPAC, is involved in advising and assisting the militaries of those countries. And I think that's important. And so SOCPAC is in the southern Philippines, for example, helping the AFP, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, go after the problem set themselves. So this is a Philippine problem set. The Philippine authorities are the ones taking direct action, and we're helping them where we can and where they want to have help. So I think that's the approach that's good for the Pacific, and it's working, I think, right now.
And do any of these countries, Admiral, have the ability to assist in anything that would occur in the South China Sea? Or if they don't, what do we have to do in order to get them up to that level?
Yeah, I think they're reluctant to be involved in activities in South China Sea that would put them in a position of confrontation with China. It's the Philippines, though, that we have to remember is the one who started the arbitration case, which got us in the place we are in the legal framework. These countries are subject to economic pressures and other pressures from China, and they all have issues. Not all of them, but Malaysia, for example, has issues in the South China Sea with China, as does Indonesia and an area north of Natuna, and Malaysia is with the South Laconia Shoals, and all of the issues that we know about with the Philippines. So I think that we need to encourage them to stand up to China, and we need to backstop them where we can, especially with countries that we're allied with, like the Philippines. They are a treaty ally of the United States.
But the Philippines also have some internal problems, leadership-wise, that can cause us some problems. I guess from your remarks, I'm going to take it that depending on them for substantial help in that area is probably minimal. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Harris, thank you for being here today. In 2010, a Republic of Korea Navy ship was sunk by what is believed to be a North Korean torpedo. That same year, the U.S. Navy issued an urgent operational need to accelerate the development of the Navy's surface ship torpedo defense system, which provides advanced torpedo detection, classification, and countermeasures system to protect the Navy's high-value surface ships and aircraft carriers from increasing torpedo threats. Since then, torpedo threats have continued to increase, with adversary submarines operating within torpedo range of carrier battle groups, as evidenced by encounters in 2015 with the USS Ronald Reagan Battle Group, and today highlighted by the current and aggressive threats we face from North Korea. I understand that 4 systems have been successfully tested, installed, and deployed since 2014 to help counter this threat, with over 20,000 operational hours on board high-value units. However, I also understand that budget constraints may be threatening the further development and deployment of this system on all CVNs. This is particularly concerning considering the recent provocations from our adversaries and specific threats this week from North Korea stating their intent to sink a U.S. Navy strike group led by USS Carl Vinson. With nearly $530 million invested in this technology to date, is there a renewed priority to ensure this system development continues and is rapidly deployed on every high-value unit in our fleet?
Yeah, sir, I'm not an expert on the system, but I will say that the budget constraints are such that the Navy will have to make difficult decisions, and this will likely be one of those decisions that'll be made. The system will be cut if we don't get the budget, or if the Navy doesn't get the resources that is asked for.
Can you defend the priority?
I don't know what the Navy has put above this in terms of other systems that they would keep, and this one they would cut. But I would trust the Navy to be able to prioritize all of the systems they have, and then they're going to have to take cuts. I mean, you know, in a finite fiscal environment, then you can't have everything, and I think the Navy will make those difficult decisions.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, welcome, and thank you for your testimony here this morning, and most especially thank you for your great service to the nation. So we've recently seen an increase in military operations by the new administration, such as the cruise missile strikes in Syria and the large-yield bomb dropped in Afghanistan. While I certainly think that both of those actions were appropriate, if we move the aperture over to North Korea, I fear that employing similar actions without broader, more strategic goals in place may have disaster effects on the 20 million South Koreans and 24,000 U.S. troops living within range of North Korean Army artillery. How is PACOM ensuring that the broader strategic implications are being weighed when planning action on the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, sir. And as I talked earlier, I believe that the best thing that we can do as PACOM, the best thing that I can do, is to ensure that we have credible combat power available all the time to face whatever threat comes out of North Korea. I think the lack of a strong, credible combat deterrence is actually an encouragement to Kim Jong-un to do things that are provocative or dangerous, or both. And so if we don't have that capability, or if he thinks we don't have the capability, then that would make him, I think, adventurous, and that would, in fact, then threaten those 25 million people who live in Seoul. That would then require a response by us and our South Korean ally, and then we would be at it again. So I believe that the best thing that I can do is to provide that credible combat force in the face of Kim Jong-un's provocations.
Thank you, Admiral. On another topic, I strongly believe that multilateral exercises with our partners and allies are critical to achieving a unified front in the face of some of our more aggressive and challenging adversaries, whether they be in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, in the UCOM arena, or elsewhere. Now, unfortunately, we constantly hear that these exercises are at increasing risk of being canceled due to budget constraints and uncertainty. What lessons do you fear we risk losing if we're unable to work with our allies? And will these partnering countries seek or be approached by other powerful nations in the region to fill the void that the U.S. leaves?
Yeah, clearly, the exercises are important on a number of levels. For those countries that are our military peers, you know, the high-end militaries in the region, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, you know, these are high-end militaries that we need to exercise with, because we might be in a position to have to rely on them for some operation, or they might be in a position to rely on us for some operation. And if we don't know how to work with them, then it'll be unproductive in the early days. And then there are countries that seek to be better, and exercises with us and countries like us are desired. If we can't provide that level of exercise support, then other countries will step in and do that in lieu of us. And when I say other countries, that's a euphemism for China. And so China will step in, and they will become, or they will try to become the security partner of choice, if you will, for countries that we are their security partner of choice today. But that's because we invest time and resources and equipment and the American people reflected in the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen. We invest in our relationships with these countries. And if we don't do that because of budget constraints, and exercises are clearly on the table, the services will cut stuff and I'll cut exercises in order to make my books balance. And the end result of that is we'll have a lesser capable military alliance structure, not only because our allies will be less capable, we'll be less capable, and then we'll also have less professional relationships with our friends and partners in the region.
Thank you, Admiral. You've confirmed a lot of the things that I feared or had concerns about. Thank you for the work you're doing. I have other questions I'll submit for the record. But, Admiral, thank you for your service and the extraordinary work you're doing. I yield back.
Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here. Always appreciate people like yourself that give your life to protecting the rest of us. Admiral, you know that some of the times when we ask you questions, it's not just to be enlightened. It's sometimes we even have some idea what the answer is, but we're trying to inform policy decisions, sometimes even use it for leverage for policy decisions. So that might reflect some of my questions here today. So the first one is a general question about, in general, how much did we spend to field the Aegis Ashore test site at the Pacific Missile Range facility?
Sir, I don't know. But I'll find out for you and get back to you.
That'd be fine. Then the follow-up: Does it make sense to defend Hawaii from Alaska instead of using this particular site?
Yeah. In response to an earlier question, I believe we should do both. We should consider doing both.
Redundancy.
I think so. And while I'm not advocating for interceptors in Hawaii, I'm advocating that we study the issue of putting interceptors in Hawaii, which I think is prudent.
Sure. Well, we have the Navy's new Spy-6 and the TIPI-2 radar at Pacific Missile Range facility. Can we use those radars to add to the defense of Hawaii today?
I believe we can. But I'm advocating for the Defense of Hawaii radar, a different radar, a different kind of radar. I think that there are two different, or a couple of defense contractors that are interested in providing that. So I don't have a view as to which radar is better or all of that. But I think we need to have a Defense of Hawaii radar system. And then we should look at the interceptors that would naturally go with that.
Would it be better in terms of some of those mechanisms to wait several years to conduct environmental impact statement process and analysis of alternative processes to build a brand new radar?
Well, I think we have to follow the rules, right? And so the EIS, and environmental impact statement, and all of that is important. And I think we must follow those rules. That said, there is a sense of urgency here. I mean, Kim Jong-un just a few days ago threatened Australia. And so, so we have a sense of urgency and the rules, and I think we can bring them together in ways that don't violate the law, but also move this thing forward.
Are you suggesting that if a warhead landed, that it might have an environmental impact?
It might have that, sir.
Right. Should we evaluate the capability of the SM-3 Block 2A to defend Hawaii from North Korea and its ICBMs?
I think we should evaluate that. That should be one of the systems that we look at to see what's best for the defense of Hawaii.
In terms of Hawaii's defense, and specifically with North Korea in mind, is there anything that you would tell this committee that you think is a priority that has not been essentially elaborated on here today?
No, sir. I think I've been pretty clear that I'm advocating for a Defense of Hawaii radar. I'm advocating for a study to see if it's worthwhile to put interceptors in Hawaii to improve Hawaii's capability against North Korean missiles, or anyone else's missiles for that matter.
Well, Admiral, thank you, and we'll save any other questions for the classified moments. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Admiral Harris. Good to see you. And I'd like to thank Congressman Franks for his concern over Hawaii. Some people think we're just an island, and it's good to hear that my colleagues are concerned about the safety of our islands. Congressman Franks also brought up PMRF, which I have always felt is essential to the defense not only of the PACOM or Indo-Asia-Pacific area, but also for the rest of the United States. And I think what we're getting at here, and if we can't talk about it except in a classified setting, I can understand that. And that is really the land mass that we have. The question is whether we can have a permanent interceptor in Hawaii versus, and still not sacrifice the missile ranges now what it tends to do, which is to do all the testing. Do you have an opinion as to whether the two can coexist? Because I've heard the use of the phrase conditional permanent versus an actual permanent structure.
Yeah, I believe they can coexist, and I also believe that PMRF, the Pacific Missile Range Facility, is a national treasure.
I agree with you. I think you can't duplicate it anywhere,
Right.
especially with the undersea components of it.
The whole thing, the size of the airspace, the size of the range space, it cannot be replicated. It's a national treasure.
And I guess on that note, we should tell our colleagues in Hawaii that they should be very receptive to extending the lease surrounding PMRF, because that, of course, has kept it in the position that it's in. I'm also interested in the concept of the undersea warfare that you wrote about in your testimony, and the fact that out of the 230 of the world's 400 foreign submarines are in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. 130 of them belongs to China, North Korea, and Russia. I guess my other question is, who do the others belong to? But in addition to that, what is the capabilities of these submarines that we find?
So the others are friends, allies, and partners: us, Japanese, Koreans, Indonesians, Indians, and so they all add up. The capabilities vary depending on the country. Some are very, very capable. The Japanese submarines, the French submarines that Australia is going to buy, highly capable submarines. Others are not so capable, the North Korean subs, for example. China has a range, so they have capable submarines at the high end and less capable older ones, but they're trying to make the capable submarines even more capable and close the gap with us. China has the full range, diesel boats, nuclear boats, guided missile submarines, ICBMs, or SSBNs, the Jin-class ballistic missile submarines, and so on. So it kind of covers the range. Russia's most advanced and newest class of submarines are now in the Pacific. The Dolgoruki class SSBN is now in the Pacific. These are dramatic improvements in capability of competitor submarine forces.
We hate to say this, but how do they compare to our submarines, Russia's newest top-grade submarine?
As I've said before, I believe that there is no submarine on the planet that can touch an American submarine, a Virginia-class submarine. That said, that gap between us and the next best and the third next best is closing. Their competitors are working and investing hard to close those gaps. And we have to continue to resource our submarine force in order to keep that gap a gap.
In the testimony or the statement by General Brooks, he talks about a successful testing of North Korea's developmental submarine-launched ballistic missile. Now, I'm curious as to whether it launched from North Korea's submarine, and how many of them do they have floating out there?
Yeah, they have one. It's designated as SSB as opposed to SSBN because it's a conventional submarine. It's the Gore, G-O-R-A-E, and that's the rudimentary ballistic missile capable submarine that North Korea has.
But it can launch, nonetheless, a ballistic missile?
It can. It is a rudimentary submarine, but it can launch a ballistic missile.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you, Admiral.
Dr. Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here and for your very informative answers and direct answers. And I would postulate that, save the North Korea and Chinese border being heavily armed by their militia and their armies, that China would already be having a significant refugee crisis from North Korea because of the starving citizens under Kim Jong-un's leadership. You've answered most of the questions. I just have one. For your intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, your ISR requirements in your command specifically, your command is so vast. Are those requirements being met on the ISR platforms?
They're not, sir, but I believe any combatant commander would sit here and tell you that his or her ISR requirements are not being met.
So you could use certainly more drones, more aircraft, certainly.
Right. All of the above. You know, I call myself, I have an insatiable need for stuff because I think you all have an insatiable need for security.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McSally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, it's good to see you again, and thanks for your service. I served for 26 years. My squadron was on the hook in O-plans to go support your theater if needed. I'm deeply concerned about the North Korean threat. It certainly didn't come overnight, but I think there's a sense of urgency, the grave nature of it, for them to be heading towards a potential to hold hostage United States cities with a nuclear weapon. From my view, and many of us here, that's a non-starter, and I'm sure you agree with that. But as you've talked today eloquently about some of the options of how to address that, they're not easy options, right? And some people will argue whether we're dealing with a rational actor or not. Trying to manage that escalation potential while we ensure we have the combat power that you need to have a real deterrent. Because deterrence means you got to have capability and intent, right, in order to stop his action. And whether he's rational or not, these are all the factors that are needing to be considered. China is often considered to be in a critical role here. And some people think that maybe they're stepping up finally, but they've really not acted in good faith in the past. You know, they support UN Security Council resolutions, but then they don't really enforce them. They're trying to kind of have it both ways. I'm wondering, in your perspective as a sailor statesman and your strategic mind and your understanding of the dynamics in the area, has something shifted recently with China realizing that's in their best interest to do whatever it takes to stop this threat from happening? And if so, could you just share some of your perspectives on that?
So on the question of China being helpful now in the current framework, I think it's early days. And so President Trump had, I believe, an excellent meeting with President Xi, and China is doing things. Whether they continue to do things or not, I mean, we're going to have to wait and see. As you say, in the past, China has said they were going to do things and not done them, or not said it and then done them, and all of that. So it's early days. So we'll just have to see how this goes. I'm encouraged.
Okay.
And I believe that Kim Jong-un has noticed that there's a change afoot with regard to China, and I think that's important. With regard to the issue of whether he's a rational actor or not, I think the term rational or crazy or irrational, I don't think those are helpful, because he is what he is. This is what Dr. Perry said a long time ago. You have to deal with the Korea as it is, not as
we want it to be.
And so he is what he is, rational or not. He is in control of his country. He's in absolute control of his military.
Right. But that matters for our deterrence theory, right? Whether somebody's doing that cost-benefit analysis.
It does. And he's on a quest for nuclear weapons and stated threatened American cities, Australian cities, and the like. I believe that part of deterrence is also signaling. You know, so you've got capability times resolve times signaling, and the signaling part is what we're doing. I think that's where your military comes into play. And so all of that together comes down to what I responded to earlier, that my job is to provide options to the president, but also to provide credible combat power visibly, so that KGU will think about that when he does the things that he does.
Thank you. And in your testimony, I'm also concerned, and you laid it out pretty clearly, about the aggressive increase of China's activity in the South China Sea, East China Sea. These are things we've talked about the last few years. A lot of the public, I think, is not aware. You know, they've created islands where they previously didn't exist before. 7 military bases, capability for 72 fighter hangars. They're closing the capability gap. Are our options in the area militarily complicated by the fact that we're now sort of pressuring China to deal with North Korea in addressing their aggressiveness in the region? That seems we got to look at it all together.
Yeah, I believe, Congresswoman, that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and great powers can have disagreements in one area and agree in another, and can do both. Okay. And I think that we should encourage China and be appreciative of what they're doing with us with regards to North Korea, and we should also be willing to criticize them for their aggressiveness and coerciveness in the South China Sea.
Thanks. And these bases they've created, you've talked eloquently about the destruction to the marine ecosystems and how this is being an environmental catastrophe. Are you hearing, since last year when we talked about this, any outcry from environmentalists, international groups? I mean, this is a major destruction. Are you seeing anything shift?
I'm not seeing anything from the environmental community. Dr. McManus and his team down at the University of Miami continue to say that this is the worst ecological disaster in human history. The U.S.-China Commission, which is an arm of Congress, has written about this in their 2016 report about the damage that China's done to the fragile ecosystems in the South China Sea.
Thanks. I'm over my time, but the silence is deafening, I think. Yeah. Thanks. I yield back, sir.
Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral Harris, for your service. As you know, the history, President Clinton in 1994 through 2002 got North Korea to agree to freeze plutonium production. And the fact is that we had a deal where we were going to buy all of their medium and intermediate missiles. And then President Bush came and disregarded both of those deals and labeled North Korea as part of the axis of evil. Isn't it a fact that if President Clinton's approach had been followed and those agreements had been followed through on, that we wouldn't be in the situation we are in today?
You know, as I review the history, I don't want to be accused of you know, being a revisionist historian, but I believe that you know, agreements have to go both ways, and I don't know that we could have believed with certainty that Kim Il-sung would have followed that agreement. We know that Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, or Kim Jong-il, I guess, in 1992, and Kim Jong-un have raised the level, especially KJU, has raised the level of threats against us and our treaty allies. And that's what I have to focus on when I think about is where we are today.
But we know, sir, that for 8 years there was no plutonium production. Do you believe that direct talks, the kind that President Clinton initiated, where we had a plan to buy the long and medium-sized missiles, would be an approach? And do you think it was a mistake in 2002 to label them part of the axis of evil and give up on both diplomatic efforts of the Clinton administration?
Again, sir, you're asking me to grade the homework of a commander-in-chief, and I'm just not going to do it.
The other question I had is the recent ballistic missile launch in North Korea was launched with Prime Minister, the Japanese Prime Minister's visit. And I'm sure you're familiar with Nobusuke Kishi, the Prime Minister's grandfather. Prime Minister's grandfather was, under the United States, labeled a war criminal. And the North Korean KJU's grandfather fought Nobusuke Kishi in World War II. Do you think the North Korean missile launch may have had something to do with the fact that Prime Minister Abe's grandfather, who was a war criminal and fought the Koreans, fought his own grandfather, had something to do with the history? The reason I ask these questions is I feel our foreign policy needs to be dictated with an understanding of the complexity of history and President Clinton's approach, which, in my view, was successful.
Sir, I'll just say that my father My father fought my mother's relatives in Japan. My father was an American sailor in World War II. My mother's family are Japanese, and they fought each other. But that doesn't change the fact that Japan and the United States are the closest of allies today. And I don't think that my personal opinion is, I don't think that KJU's grandfather's history with Prime Minister Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, I don't think that affects how KJU acts today in Northeast Asia.
I mean, he's been making these threats, and I agree with your testimony, sir, about the crazy threats against Australia and New Zealand, and he's been making these threats for the last number of decades. But would you be open to at least exploring direct talks again of the kind we had in the Clinton administration? And do you think that there's any possibility to get to buying missiles? And the last reason I say this, because you understand better than any of us, and I admire not just your service, but your family's service to this country, that the nuclear missiles there, as I understand it, there are 15,000 underground sites that have this. North Korea is not. They've got 200,000 special forces or an army. I mean, it's not an insignificant country. And so when we're looking at what the options are, shouldn't one option be the type of diplomatic approach that President Clinton took?
I believe that as the President has said, that all options should be on the table, whether they're all kinetic options where I come in, or whether there are other options where the State Department can come in, Treasury, Commerce, and the like. I think we need to have all the options on the table. But simply because North Korea is getting stronger militarily is no reason for us to turn our back on our allies and on ourselves and acknowledge and roll over and suggest that because they're stronger, we should do nothing.
I appreciate your service, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Conaway.
Yeah, I'm over here, Harry.
Hey, sir.
Thank you, and appreciate you being here with your service. Trent Franks' comments about self-serving questions. I'm a co-sponsor of the 12th carrier authorization work. Would that make life easier in the Pacific if you had another carrier at your disposal?
In the Pacific, yes, sir, it would.
All right. You mentioned a couple of times that you've got to balance your books. Turning to a little more mundane issue that doesn't rise to the level of criticality of some of the other things we're talking about, but nevertheless important. You mentioned balancing your books several times, sequestration impact, CR's impact. I'm concerned that the Navy cannot audit its books and records, as everyone in the system is concerned. Are there any issues, and your team is not directly responsible for auditing, but you buy a lot of stuff, you have a lot of internal controls that have to be functioning in order to be auditable. Are there any things going on in your command that you can't get fixed in order to allow the Navy to reach their audit capabilities?
Yeah, sir, I'm not an expert on the audit issue, and the combatant commands don't buy a lot of stuff. We don't have, the services get the budget. They're part of the budget. They're the ones that go out and buy ships, airplanes, submarines, tanks, and all that kind of stuff. But
you buy fuel, you buy ammunition. You're responsible for keeping track of fuel, ammunition, other things that do affect.
The services are through the service components underneath PACOM.
Right.
But I'm not charged with auditing what Pacific Fleet does with fuel and that kind of stuff.
Well, I don't know, but you're in charge of those who do. Is it an issue that if it came to your attention, you'd weigh in on and be in favor?
I would, if I can understand how my weighing in would have an effect, or if it can move the process along. Okay. And I believe in auditing. I think it's important that not only we have enough money to buy the things that we need, that we buy them in ways that comport with the law,
sure.
and no wastage.
Yeah. At some point, though, Americans, taxpayers' support for getting you enough money will be a hinge on whether or not we can prove to the American people that we keep track of it properly through these audits. Turning back to North Korea, elections next month for a new president. Any sense of what impact that will have on our alliance, our relationship with our country?
I don't think it'll have any impact on our alliance or our relationship. I think that the North Korean threat is so big that the Korean people writ large appreciate the alliance and what the alliance does for them and for us. It's a two-way street. And I believe the major candidates, we're down to 5 candidates now, and the front runners have come out strongly in favor of THAAD, strongly in favor of the alliance, and I think that it'll be good no matter who wins. And I think that's a tribute. We should acknowledge what this is. I mean, here you have an ally, a country, South Korea, that's under this enormous threat. Their president was impeached. They have a strong military, and yet they're proceeding apace with the democratic process, which I think is just terrific. And they're going to elect a new leader here, a new president here, the 10th or the 9th or so of May, and I think we'll go forward from there.
No, well put. I think the strength of that democracy and the republic there is shown by the ability to handle these crises that are going on right now, and we're proud of those folks. But obviously, want to make sure that they continue to know that they know that they have our support to make sure that whatever that threat is up north is handled. Again, thank you for your hospitality when I was in your area a couple of years ago, and I appreciate that. Thank you for your service. Now yield back.
Mr. Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Admiral. And luckily, this was just brought up. What is the current communication and decision-making process, considering that South Korea is going through a political leadership vacuum right now? Who is our counterpart? Who is helping at least the South Koreans make the civilian military decisions? I am concerned, obviously, that we're going through an election. I'm glad that obviously it's going to continue going forward. But in these tough times, like, who are we talking to within the South Korean leadership right now on the political side and on the military side also?
So on the political side, excuse me, on the political side, they have an acting president. They have an acting president. They have a strong minister of defense. Right. And so I think on the political side, things are working fine. On the military side, even more so. I mean, my counterpart is General Lee, the chairman of the Iraq military. General Brooks, U.S. Army, the U.S. Forces Command Korea commander, is in country. He would normally be here, except he's busy right now. And so he has daily, if not even hourly, contact with General Lee and with the folks, the military folks, and with Minister Han, the Minister of Defense there in Korea. We have a charge d'affaires there in lieu of an ambassador, and the General Brooks and the charge are closely connected, so that the military and the diplomatic dimensions of American power are in place and operating with their South Korean counterparts on the peninsula against the North Korean threat. I'm very confident in General Brooks and his team.
Thank you, Admiral. But it does scare me that we don't have a South Korean ambassador, while at the same time South Korea doesn't have a fully vested president. Does the acting president right now have the full confidence of its military leadership, or at least the political backing of the parties to act in concert for whatever needs to occur in the next couple of weeks, should something occur?
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned to the previous question, I think South Korean democracy is very strong, very vibrant, and the military in South Korea understands its place in the civil military structure, and that civilian control of the military is primary there, just as it is here in America.
I yield back.
Admiral, let me just touch on a few things we haven't gotten to yet. Maybe one or two sentences on our mill-to-mill relationship with some other countries. So, for example, Philippines.
Yeah, we have a great mill-to-mill relationship with the Philippines, despite some of the perturbations that we've talked about over the past year. We have a strong relationship with them, with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and in all the areas that we've had before, we still have. So we have Balikatan, we have Sama-Sama, a new exercise. We're continuing with EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, and working on those sites with the Philippines. SOCPAC, the Special Operations Command Pacific, is deeply involved in the counterterror operations in the South in support of, not in lieu of, but in support of the armed forces of the Philippines. So I'm positive about our relationship in the mill-to-mill space, and I'm encouraged by it.
Vietnam?
Vietnam is a great opportunity for us. I believe that the work that's being done in maritime security is positive, and we have this theory, this approach called sense, share, and collaborate, where we're now building out their ability to sense what's going on in the military, in the maritime domain. Soon they'll be able to share that with each other and other countries in the area, and then to coordinate with us and other countries with what they find in their maritime domain. So I'm very positive about where we are with Vietnam.
How about India?
India presents, I think, the biggest opportunity for us. We share values, both large democracies, a lot of cultural commonalities with Indian Americans here in the United States and Americans who live and work in India. The military is strong and growing. I think that we could be helpful to them in terms of jointness and demonstrating to them the value of jointness within their military. They are a major defense partner of us. We're helping them across the space in the defense realm. So I'm very pleased with where we are with India. I've had the chance to address the Raisina dialogue in its first two iterations, and I hope to return to India within a year to continue the relationships that we've built up with the Indian military.
And finally, we haven't really talked about the freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. How frequent do you command those? Can you talk a little about that effort?
Yeah, so I command them through Pacific Fleet, down echelon. So the Pacific Fleet commander who does the same with 7th Fleet. So it's generally it's a Navy operation, and so that'll go through the fleet. I command them from a combatant commander perspective. I take direction and guidance from Secretary of Defense and the National Command Authority on the conduct of those operations. I think we'll be doing some soon, but that's kind of where we are on that today.
Okay, Ms. Murphy, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Admiral Harris, thank you for being here today. I had the pleasure of working for Admiral Fallon in the CAG, and I appreciate your assessment of the security challenges in the region and how these conditions compare to my time at PACOM years ago. I wanted to know a little more about your vision for strengthening and modernizing our alliances and partnerships in the region. You described the effort in your testimony as partnerships with a purpose. What does partnerships with a purpose look like, and where are there opportunities for growth? And I'm asking you this today because I'm introducing two bills to try to get at the enormous security challenges in the Asia-Pacific region by strengthening both our interagency and international commitments to the region. The first bill would create an interagency intelligence integration cell, which would streamline, synthesize, and synchronize intel on North Korea so that U.S. national security policymakers would have the best information possible to make decisions. And the second bill would authorize the President to create an Asia-Pacific Defense Commission comprised of the U.S. and willing partner nations to deepen cooperation between the United States and its regional allies to improve our ability to address some of the security challenges in the area. I think you may agree that the strength of our relationships in the region comes from trust, credibility, and across time. And these measures were meant to send a clear signal to both our allies and our adversaries that the U.S. is committed to the Asia-Pacific region in a credible and enduring manner.
I think that on the partnerships with a purpose, and you'll recall from your time there that almost all of our relationships heretofore have been hub and spoke relationships. These are bilateral relationships with all of the different countries that we have relationships with. I get it that our treaty allies by nature are bilateral, and that's what they want, and that's what we want for treaty allies. But I think that we need to go beyond hub and spoke to have partnerships with a purpose. And I'll give you three quick examples. Our two treaty allies in Northeast Asia, Japan and Korea, we're really about defending Northeast Asia. So that becomes a naturally forming trilateral relationship. There's no way, I don't think, that Japan and Korea are going to have an alliance. But we should have a trilateral relationship focused on defending Northeast Asia. I think there's a naturally forming democracy-centric multilateral, quadrilateral relationship between Japan, the United States, Australia, and India. I think there's a naturally forming partnership focused on counterterrorism. Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, us, and Australia and New Zealand. So these are some of the ideas that we're trying to advocate for and forward and push these partnerships with a purpose. And I think the legislation that you've described, I think they're excellent. And I'll need to study it more to get into the eaches of it. But I think on the surface, based on what you just said, that they're commendatory.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And what do you think some of the resource challenges or opportunities in actually resourcing the ability to do partnerships with a purpose?
Yeah. So I think that in the resources world, all I face are challenges. Right. There's no glut of resources. So, but I think that the work of the Congress to forward the Asia-Pacific Stability Initiative is terrific if that comes through. The last 2 years we've had the Maritime Security Initiative, about $500 million or so spread out over a number of years, and I think that's helpful. But the Asia-Pacific Stability Initiative I think will help significantly as we go forward over the next few years.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
You're back the remainder of my time.
Admiral, thank you. For what it's worth, I think y'all made the right call in keeping General Brooks on duty, given what's happening in the world. I appreciate your answers. The committee will reassemble upstairs in classified session in approximately 5 minutes or so. And with that, this hearing stands adjourned.
Thank you, sir.